restroom and drinking fountain break. We're going to continue on our discussion and with the group activity on genes, alleles, and dominants. And what I want to do right now is we're going to quick review some of the terms real quick that we want to make sure we have in our heads for our activity. And while I'm doing that, each one of you needs to take one of these activity sheets. And one thing we want to keep in mind when we're talking about genes is the definition of gene, and that's chemical factors that influence traits. And we also want to keep in mind that these genes can come in alternative forms, which we defined earlier as alleles. And the principle of dominance says that you could have one version of the gene or one allele could be more controlling than the other. We're missing two people today. Genes do code for particular traits, but they may not be easily seen. It could be something like instructions on how your body metabolizes certain sugars. It could be, but it could be something as simple as height. And we also want to keep in mind that when segregation occurs, when do these genes separate? And then how are they inherited? And with the segregation, allele separation occurs during the formation of gametes, and then of course the gametes are your sex cells. And with this activity that we're going to do today, there's two different situations you can have with alleles. Like with Mendel and his P's. You can be homozygous, meaning that you have the same pairs of genes for any hereditary characteristic, which, say, an example would be tallness, and big T represents the dominant allele, so whenever the dominant is present, tallness is expressed, the organism of the tall trait. But if the pair is big T, then it's called homozygous dominant because it's the same type of allele and it's the dominant type. And then if you have little t, which would be the recessive trait, it's called homozygous recessive, and the resulting organism would be short. And then you also have heterozygous, which means that you have dissimilar pairs of alleles that code for a particular type of gene, and where it'd be big T, but your resulting offspring or resulting organism would still be tall. So, and also note, unless you're told differently, a heterozygote will always express the dominant trait. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of, like skin color, we won't cover that right now, but skin color is coded by 8 different genes. So there's a lot of, genes can influence the expression of other genes. So, these are the lesson objectives in standard form, but I'm going to cover it the way we did to keep it simple for you guys. Be sure that we are able to define the following terms, which we've already kind of gone through that and covered that again, so Mario's going to help us knock that one out. And then we need to define and explain the principle of dominance, what alleles are, dominant recessive alleles, and how traits are inherited. And we covered this earlier before we took our break. We just discussed what alleles are. We just discussed what the differences between dominant and recessive alleles, and then also traits are inherited, through our parents. So, Mario will knock that out for us. So before we get to the activity, we're going to practice a little bit. Like say for instance we have 2 trees and they're the same species and they're the same age, so don't say one's older than the other. And big T is the dominant allele and codes for tall, and little t is the recessive allele and codes for short if there's not a dominant allele present. So for your tall tree, you could say that phenotypically it's tall. Genotypically, it could either have big T or big T, little t. With the short, there can't be a dominant allele available, so it has to be little t, which, there we go, which right there kind of explains it a little bit better for you. So we're going to have you guys, the phenotypic difference between Pedro and Napoleon here is that Pedro is short, Napoleon is tall. So we're going to pretend that they're like trees. And so based on their phenotype, how they look, what are the possible genotypes and what genes can be present? So for Napoleon, he's tall, so what do you have? Would you have big T or little t's? What do you think? Anybody? Big T. Right. And there's 2 different possibilities.
two big T's or one big T and one little T.
Right. So he could either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. All right. And then Pedro, of course, since he's short, would be little t, little t. Good. Okay, so we're going to move into our if they're mated activity. And what you have with your sheet right now, there should be a paper clip with a bunch of letters on it. And don't let those letters fly around because those are your gametes. And you don't leave your gametes laying around. Be bad. You don't know who's going to pick them up. They could look like this. So, what I want to do is I want to get into groups in just a second. But what we're doing is, to save some time, I've already made the random selections for you. That's what the strips of paper are. And let's see if we can do our groups. So go ahead and get in your groups. In particular, it talks about how some alleles are expressed only when the genotype is homozygous. This is just extra information for you. So when we move into chapter 12 and talk about this in a little more depth, you have to have a background of like that. Maybe just because you're homozygous doesn't mean that, or heterozygous doesn't mean you're going to have, like, be tall. Just because you have big T doesn't mean you're going to be tall. It could be an intermediate value. You could be not tall but not short. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then another thing, it describes how sex is determined. That's coming in the next section, but this is there's a bonus point opportunity on your activity. So if you have a chance to look over that, that's fine too. But we're going to skip right to the activity itself. So one person from your group, I want to be the sketch artist. They don't have to be perfect, but if they can copy basic shapes, that'd be handy. And in your packet, I'm going to hand these out one per group. You guys get one. This is your result sheet. And what you need to do is you need to pair up your gamete sheet, which has like the R, C, H, etc., 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 and uppercase and lowercase. Those are your alleles. On your result piece of paper, go ahead and put those on there, and it's easier if you list one person's and then right below that list the other person's, so you can pair them up real easy. So go ahead and do that.
Do box.
And then you get your sheet. And put it right in the spot right below where it says record your paired allele thing. Because you're going to be drawing something in here in a little bit. There's a little section down at the bottom where you can, with some lines, you can put them right down all the lines.
Yes, but like big on.
And make sure you keep the capitals and lower cases the same as they are on your sheet. That'll help. And what we're doing is we're pretending that if you guys were to mate, what your resulting offspring is going to be. And what it's going to do is kind of demonstrate to you how dominant and recessive alleles work. Okay. Are you guys getting pretty close having that on there? Okay. Now, you guys are already ahead. If you turn into your packet a sheet or two, you're going to find a phenotypic key, which shows different like hair style, like widow's peak or not, if your eyes are big or small, if you have a unibrow or not. Go ahead and using what your gamete pairs are, go ahead and try to draw as best as you can based on the phenotypic key what your offspring would be. So if you guys are having any trouble, down here in your key, you have like big R, so if you have big R, you're going to draw a round face. If you have a big R, little r, you're still going to have a round face, because the heterozygote or hybrid still expresses the round trait. And we could say that round is a dominant. But if you have little r, you're going to draw the square head. And draw it big enough so like later on in class we're going to share with everybody. Now it can be like, if you see like wavy hair and you want to make yours a guy, that's fine. You can just not make it really long past the ears. It's up to you. Or you can have a mullet. You can have a mullet, that'd be alright.